Not all who wander are lost. Welcome to Brothers of the Serpent podcast.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, angels and demons and monsters and serpents, aliens, skirptards. I think I got everybody this time. Right?
Yeah.
Oh, and snowflakes. All you special individual snowflakes out there drifting down in the night sky.
Fuck snowflakes. Snake flakes.
Unaware that you're about to land in the desert of time amidst the sands and melt there.
Sad fate.
And
for the
lose your
flakes.
individual specialities and just become one grain of sand. Like all the rest of us. All right. So this is episode X, 10. It's Roman numerals, X, which is amazing. I'm not sure I thought we would get this far.
We haven't.
Oh, shit.
We've only done 9.
Damn it. Oh, fuck. Right. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. What?
Yeah. 1 is a given. We've already determined that.
Right.
That's why we have the cubit rod. We'll explain that later.
Yeah.
After people ask about it.
So because this is episode 10, or really because this is when we decided to do it, we've got a lot of questions from people mainly saying, slow down, back up, and explain whatever the fuck you're talking about. So we got a bunch of topics that people have asked us to kind of go through more, in more detail to kind of give it from the beginning so that they can, kind of feel like they're part of the story here. Cause they're just like, yeah, so you guys are talking about shit. And it's like, every time we hang out, I just hear you guys talking about stuff and I have no fucking clue what you're talking about. So we're going to explain some stuff. But first, I actually have an email from a listener.
We have an email?
Yes. That's our
Yay!
very, 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 very first email. So it says, come on, email. There it is. Super Snake Bros question. Dear Snake Bros, long-time listener, first-time emailer. I couldn't help but wonder if you guys could be any snake in the world, in any given area of the world, at any specific time in time. What snake would you be? What area of the world would you reside? And what year would it be? I'll hang up and take your answer off the air. The Kamakian.
Oh, Kamakian.
The Kamakian. Well, I know what it is, but you go ahead. I've had time to think about this, so it's not fair. Right, so I put you on the spot.
Wait, what snake could I be?
At what time? Yeah.
At what time?
And where?
I would be...
Space snake?
Yeah, the serpent in the sky.
Right.
At the beginning of time.
Awesome. The primordial dragon.
That's right.
That's what I thought of too. Either that or I would be the Leviathan. The serpent of the deep.
Is that a snake?
The serpent of the deep, the sea snake, right? A giant ocean snake. Ocean snake.
Well, yeah. If I could be any snake, including mythical snakes,
Yeah.
I would be eating my tail at the beginning of time.
Right. You would be the world eater. That's right.
But if I could be an earthly
Crom
snake,
Crook.
any earthly snake, I would be a Shnam
I knew it. Shnam.
on the beach
Hognose on the beach.
in Matagorda.
Nice.
Hell yeah.
Hell yeah.
And then I would get captured by some crazy creatures
Yeah.
who would try to raise me, and then I would escape in their laundry room. Never to be seen again by them.
I'd be one of those Arabian, like, hypnotizing snakes, that come up out of the basket.
Yeah. A cobra.
Is it a cobra?
I think so.
Oh, yeah, I guess they are.
Hell yeah, those are cool.
And then you flare out, bite the guy. He dies.
Yeah.
He
Go
lived
find the next guy with a flute.
right. Better
Or
place.
maybe a gadulka.
Right. Whatever that thing is. The Gadulka.
The gadulka. Strange.
It looks like a
ukulele violin
with a
thing.
Right. Played with a bow. All right. So that was the That was the email. Thank you for that.
Thanks, Kamakian.
I definitely would be the sea serpent, though. Or Huandi, the yellow dragon, right? I actually don't know if that's how you say his name. He was the Yellow Emperor, the first Chinese emperor. It's spelled Yuandi. So I always imagine it's Huandi. But who knows? But it said he was a dragon. So anyway, which topic do you want to hit first? We got the question about the Sphinx. We got the question about the pyramids. We got the question about the Anunnaki and the beginning of everything. And there's a few more, but I'll name those later too.
Probably the easiest for me, or the one I would be the most well-versed about, would be the Anunnaki.
All right, let's do that one because that's the beginning of everything. So,
yeah. So,
who are the Anunnaki according to the Sumerian tablets? Now, yeah, keep in mind this is according to
Zachariah
some
Sitchin.
people's translations of Sumerian.
Yeah, from
tablets.
Okay, what I know about this whole thing about the Anunnaki, I got from The 12th Planet, which is a book written by Zachariah Sitchin.
And the Earth Chronicles, right?
Yeah, the Earth Chronicles. It was the first in a series of books. And I went through most of them with my PDF reader.
Yeah. You need to queue up something for that so we can show people why we imitate it that way.
Yeah. So, as far as I know, most people, I guess mainstream archaeology doesn't think they're the same. They're mythical gods, according to the mainstream archaeology.
Yeah, mainstream archaeology's translations are almost exactly the same as Sitchin's. It's their interpretation,
right?
That's vastly different,
right? So these texts come from Sumer, which is in Iraq, modern day Iraq,
and in that area,
right? The
Eridu, all those cities,
and in that area, we have discovered just thousands and thousands of clay tablets that have what they call cuneiform writing on them, and it's a writing that is done with a stylus. It's just this little sort of wedge shaped stylus, and it's
right. So you can make lines and triangles,
right? And it looks amazing. But they discovered tons of them, and they're still translating them. They're still discovering more.
Yeah.
But the Epic of Gilgamesh comes from Sumer, from the clay tablets.
Right. Now, I'm not sure if we have an actual original Sumerian version of that. It might be Babylonian, but still, it's still about like you have Sumer, and then Sumer becomes like Babylon, and then you have Akkad, and then Assyria. Yeah. I don't know what
Acadia.
I don't know what the order is, but yeah, like Sargon of Akkad, Acadia, and of course the Babylon, the Babel Tower. But those all also used cuneiform writing, and they all were sort of like they were just the next versions of Sumer. Basically, is the way I look at it. I mean, they were different, but still.
And eventually, Egypt inherited this.
Right. Egypt and
this stuff.
Yeah.
But anyway,
everybody inherited it.
The Sumerians wrote about these people or beings, basically gods. They called them gods that came down from the heavens.
We call them gods. Their word was Anunnaki, right? Or the
Anunnaki.
shining ones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They were deities. You could look at it that way. Okay.
They were above human.
Right. And they supposedly came down from the heavens to Earth.
First, it was Enki.
Right. And
with the 50.
Well, I'm just saying, broadly speaking, like
broadly
they came down here and they taught. They took the animals that were here, or the hominids that were here, supposedly, and made mankind. So this is where we get this quote unquote myth of God taking the clay and putting his image on it or whatever, and
you could actually find old like if you go on Google search and look up like Sumerian creation stuff, you can find old like pieces of old broken vases and stuff that have these sort of interesting like scenes where you see like a large being holding a small being in its hands, right? Like a large human looking person, but it's holding a little human looking person in his hands, and you can tell that they're creating this thing because there's another big guy over there, and like that they're doing science and they're like creating it. So and then you see a whole bunch of the little guys and the two big people behind them. Just a lot of strange sort of rudimentary stick figure scenes like that. Like it look like they're depicting this early idea of these shining ones, these beings creating people.
Yeah. So the basic story is they came down, they created mankind to be a sort of a worker,
Right.
Laborer, and they put man,
They were here
the Adamu, in charge of, tending the fields,
Mining.
taking care of the animals, and doing all of the labor.
Yeah.
This is also explained in the book Gods of Eden by William Bramley.
Yes, which is a fact.
He goes through the translation very much in the same way that Sitchin did, and he's probably one of the people he
Right.
looked to. But
And Bramley is not a just to say this, like Bramley was a accredited historian. He was actually looking for what he thought was the source of war. Like as a historian, he looked throughout the course of history and he saw like what he thought were big trends that kept pushing us towards war like all the time. And he was like, what is behind this? And he was looking for it. And in his own words, he says he was looking for what he thought was like some kind of, Bilderberg style moneyed interests, like some shadowy group. But what he found instead was, he said, the UFO, the something else, the other X.
yeah, so
The gods of Eden.
like I said, mainstream archaeology or mainstream scholars that have interpreted these texts or that have studied the interpretations of the texts look at them in the same way that they look at, say, the Greek pantheon, or
the
even
Ennead, yeah.
all these religious quote unquote myths. So they think, well, they're mythical gods that these people worshipped. And they
stories made up.
They built temples to them, and they did all this stuff, and they would bring all their, the crops and everything that they, the best of their best to sacrifice to the gods, and blah blah blah. It's the same sort of weird human condition of let's like give away our best shit to nothing.
Right, and they broadly treat these sort of myths as like this was these primitive people's best answer to like dealing with the world and making a cohesive culture when they didn't have science. That's basically how they treat it, right? So they look at it as completely inferior to modern science. Like all these myths are just like ancient, outdated control methods. Okay,
Right.
That's how they look at it. And anything we're saying about beings coming down and creating man, they would just like, I mean,
Yeah. So the way Sitchin looked at the whole thing, and it's, to me, it's the way I prefer to look at all ancient texts is it's like this weird combination of taking them literally, but trying to apply reality to it, right? Like if you imagine that these people were trying to tell you the truth to the best of their knowledge,
right?
And you imagine yourself like how would you do it, right?
Like first of all, you have to realize that these people were physiologically exactly the same as us. They were no different from us in any way. They had the same brain capacities or whatever, and therefore the same capacities for imagination, the same intelligence, right? Just because they may not have had as much knowledge at their fingertips like we do. We have the freaking Google, and all this other stuff, but they didn't have that. But they had the same cunning, the same ability to to look at something and say, oh, I see how that works. Okay. So you imagine somebody like that trying to explain something that they see, and they're doing their best to explain it.
And also,
they're not
take
lying.
into account that the people who wrote on the cuneiform wrote the cuneiform on the clay tablets were probably scholars who perhaps were trying to record their culture's history to the best of their ability, to the best of their knowledge, to the best of whatever texts or oral traditions that they had.
Right.
So that's the way Sitchin kind of looked at it, and that's the way I typically look at things.
And if you take them literally,
with ancient texts,
that's what we like to do in this show. Is like we sort of say like, let's imagine that these people are telling the truth,
right?
And just go from there. If you take them literally, the earliest texts are not written by humans.
Right.
The scribes are actually recording down. It'll start with
The Book
saying
of
like,
Enki
my Lord
and all
Enki,
that.
my Lord Enki commanded blah blah blah, scribe on this year, this day, to write this, and then he starts writing from first person Enki's perspective,
right?
Like he's taking dictation or whatever.
So basically, here's the story in that context. Okay, to the best of my off the cuff memory.
Yeah, tell me a story.
All right, here we go. Here's the story. So there's first the solar system, our solar system described with all these planets. And there is another planet that comes in to our solar system from elsewhere.
It's a rogue
planet. And
it's a large gas giant.
yeah, and it comes in and has a battle, basically, the way they describe it, with another planet, this planet that used to exist here called Tiamat. The planet that comes in is called Nibiru.
Yep.
And it goes by Tiamat, which was a water world.
And Nibiru is moving retrograde. So if you're looking
Right.
at the solar system, all the planets, including Tiamat, are moving counterclockwise. Nibiru is coming in clockwise, which means
Right.
he's on head-on collision with anything that's coming at him. So yeah.
Right. So it comes by one time, and one of Nibiru's moons strikes Tiamat.
Directly.
Just directly crashes into it, and in their words, leaves it lifeless and fissured.
Right. And it pierces her heart. And it says that also the moons were being spawned, right? They were like soldiers or something, the way they were telling it. Because the planets are getting close to each other in all these chunks.
Right, and they're describing it in such a way as a battle, as in
Right.
war. And
Tiamat is crazy, and she's like spawning all these generals, and
as her
Nibiru
defenses.
is like going past Jupiter and getting Jupiter's weapon. Which, like Jupiter gives him a spear, and then he goes past Saturn, and Saturn gives him a shield, and these are moons too. And yeah.
So it goes by, and then it goes back away, right back. It's got a highly elliptical orbit, so it comes in very close into our solar system, close to the sun, and then is slingshot.
Tiamat's orbit was between Mars and Jupiter.
Right. And so Nibiru goes way back off into space, and then sometime later comes back, and this time Tiamat, this time Nibiru actually strikes Tiamat directly and just blows it apart into pieces. And one of these large pieces, falls into the inner solar system and settles down where we are now.
Right.
And that becomes Earth. And on its way, I believe it picked up a moon from another planet.
No. Kingu, the moon,
Kingu.
was like Tiamat's biggest dead moon.
Oh, okay,
and he had been killed in the first battle. So he's like a lifeless,
right.
described as a lifeless corpse. Yeah.
So they're describing basically this is how Earth got here, right? And
Earth gets most of Tiamat's waters.
Right. And the rest of Tiamat is hammered out, what it says, into the hammered bracelet in the sky, which is
the firmament.
Right, which is basically the
asteroid belt.
The asteroid belt.
Yeah. And probably the Oort cloud and a lot of the comets out there are pieces of Tiamat's ocean.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the comets are probably that's why they have weird orbits too.
Right. So that was part of the sort of creation story.
Right. With Nibiru standing in for God.
Right. And the way they describe Nibiru at this point, after he rearranges the solar system, is that he goes back, he has a throne, which is the most high.
Yeah.
And if you look at this orbit that it has, it actually goes up and above where it can look down on its creation.
Right. If you think of the sun as being the bottom, because it's the bottom of the big ass gravity well that this whole system is going around, then Nibiru, by going way out, is actually higher than all the other planets.
Right.
Yeah.
So sometime later, these beings, the Anunnaki, which
way later.
Yeah. way later. These beings, the Anunnaki, which are the translation is basically those who from heaven to earth came.
Right.
They come down here to Earth because they have a whole system going on over there with their planet or wherever they live, which is theorized to be actually Nibiru,
or maybe one of its moons, or something. Because Nibiru is like supposedly a large gas giant.
Maybe it is Nibiru.
I think either way, Nibiru doesn't matter. Nibiru sounds better, but it's probably like some people have theorized that Nibiru may be a brown dwarf,
right?
Which is basically like, think of Jupiter and then kind of multiply its mass by 10, and at that mass it won't be a star yet, but it'll have enough to where if you looked at it in the infrared, it would be putting out heat, right? It wouldn't be shining, but it would be warm.
Right.
So if you were orbiting really, 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 really close, like with a moon, basically sharing its atmosphere, you could get warmth from it even way out in the distant hinterlands of the solar system where the sun was useless.
Right. So the idea is that's where the Anunnaki are from. And at some point in their history, they were having this, before they first came here, they were having this big overthrow.
They're not very advanced. They're feudal.
There's a ruler, and he's being, in the process, there's like a coup happening. And Anu is this character who's taking over. And they've pretty much like, either they did this or this is natural causes or whatever, but their atmosphere is being destroyed.
Right. They've ruined some kind of protective layer in the atmosphere.
Right. And so they're seeking out gold, basically, to like rejuvenate their atmosphere or save their planet in whatever way. And where better to find gold, which is extremely heavy and typically at the center of
rocky bodies
of a body in space.
Almost impossible to retrieve from a gas giant because the pressures are ridiculous. And then for like regular rocky planets, it's going to be near the core, which is, Right. So they come to this planet that had been ripped in half,
where now all of these heavy metals are close to the surface.
Right. We have these weird veins of gold just, mixed in with regular rock up near the surface. Yeah.
So the story is they come down here, they send Anu, the king, basically sends his supposedly firstborn son, who is a bastard. His name is Enki.
But he's also awesome.
Yeah, he's awesome. He's an engineer. He's a scientist. He's just freaking badass. So he comes down here and he starts building levees and starts doing irrigation and
he lands in a swamp and goes, "Wow, a lot of snakes."
Yeah. build a castle in the swamp.
Right.
Anyways, he starts building all of this stuff everywhere and like setting up shop basically on Earth to begin mining gold. And Anu then later places his other son, his second son, but really the legitimate son between him and his wife,
right?
Enlil, who is essentially Enki's younger brother. He places him in charge of the heavens. So Enlil basically is in space or in the heavens, and in the way Sitchin describes it is like he's in charge of all of the incoming and outgoing and pretty much everything that goes on in general.
Outside of the Earth's sphere, yeah.
Right. And then Enki is in charge of the earth. He's
Lord of the earth.
He's Lord of the earth. He's down on the bottom and he's building stuff and doing things with earth and he's handling the mining and all of that. And they're doing this for hundreds of thousands of years, apparently.
Right. 432,000. Yeah.
Yeah. And at some point, like they've got this major operation going on down here, and they've got all this stuff.
And they have like
getting all this gold.
600 or 800 like lowercase, lesser named gods with them, like other Anunnaki that are not big dudes. But
there's a whole bunch of Anunnaki down here,
and they don't like it.
And they get tired of doing this work, and eventually there's like this huge revolt, and they're just like they throw down their tools. They're like, we're not doing this work anymore. This is bullshit. And somebody comes up with the idea of basically making a workforce from
that's Enki,
from the animals on the earth, and
they convene the 50, right?
Yeah.
And they're like, and Enlil's like, what are we gonna do? Like, let's kill them all, right? And Enki's like, wait, I have a solution.
Yeah. So
like,
Enki
I'll make some little us's.
Tells them about these hominids basically that are down in Africa somewhere.
Yeah, he's in the Abzu,
and he's like, hey, we can mix our genes with theirs and produce a force that's smart enough, intelligent enough to do the work we need done. So he gets the okay to go in on this project, and he starts working with Ninhursag.
Yeah, Ninhursag, his I think it's his half sister.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and she is actually she's the medical, like the chief medical officer for this whole endeavor on Earth. So she's and Enki's just he's the handyman, but she's like, she knows the genetics and knows all the science on this stuff. So he tells her what he wants and they start working on it.
So they work on this deal for a while and they start basically getting these hybrids of their genes mixed with these hominid genes. And they're using what they
Anunnaki
call
birth mothers too.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Kind of like, we would do trying to produce like a
Yeah, haven't they used cows to like birth some cloned sheep or whatever?
something like that.
Yeah.
So they're basically doing that, and they start producing these beings that they call the Adamu, right?
Well, the first ones, I think. Well, I've always looked at it as the Adamu, or the group that he eventually upgrades.
Okay.
Because at first they're like, she's like, I have done it. Because at first they make a bunch of abominations, like things that are terrible that don't work out.
Right, and you can see like, a lot of the Egyptian, I don't know what they are. Pictographs. They're not really hieroglyphs. They're carvings or whatever of all these weird creatures.
Pictograms and stuff.
Pictograms, yeah. These sort of
Chimeras.
half-human weird things mixed with all these weird things. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like maybe some supporting evidence.
Yeah. After this, you basically get the idea that after this, they are constantly playing with the genetics of Earth and they're mixing things and like, well, I kind of want this over here on this guy and I want this fish to have this eyeball and
right. So basically, they make these beings, which I'm calling the Adamu, but
they're
whatever.
basically Adamu.
And they're producing a whole bunch of them, and they start putting them to work.
They're hybrids.
And this is sort of where you get this idea, like, hey, we made you in our image, and we're putting you in this garden,
right?
And you are to name all the animals and to tend to the farms and the fields and blah blah blah, and subdue the earth, right? Not multiply yet. Right. That command is not in there yet,
right? And like all hybrids, they can't. They're sterile,
right? So at some point, I guess the idea is that Enki realizes like we need to, or maybe he's not realizing.
So
maybe they're working towards getting a hybrid that will actually be able to reproduce.
Well, I think it's like after 25 or 50,000 years or whatever, like he has to keep replacing them because like he sends off 50,000 there, sends off 100,000 there, and then like they start after a while they're sending requests back in like, hey, we need more because we've
right. I'm just kind of imagining his logic probably from the beginning was to get ultimately a result.
Well, I think Enlil was like, nah.
Right. His brother Enlil hates the Adamu, doesn't like him, and treats him like shit, utter total slaves. Yeah. And Enki never really digs that. He actually likes the Adamu. There's other Anunnaki that also like them, and they're kind of like their pets. It seems like they're like pets.
They're like pets / servants / yeah.
Anyway, there comes a point when Enki basically gives the Adamu the ability to reproduce.
Right. And this is what I think are the Adamu. Like he takes this specific group and he gives it to them and they become the Adamu, the first men.
Okay. Yeah. That may be right. So that actually really pisses off Enlil.
Really?
Yeah. Enlil is just not happy about that.
And you can see hints of Genesis in this, the very beginnings of Genesis. The serpent, Enki, giving the fruit to Eve. Right. Yeah.
And we talked about this before in a previous podcast, that the word knowing being sort of the same as sex or having sex with.
Right. Like he knew his wife. Yeah.
Right. So the serpent gives Adam and Eve the apple from the fruit, or which is the fruit of the tree of knowledge.
Of good and evil.
Right.
Yeah.
The knowledge of
good and evil is like, that's Enlil's name for it.
Yeah, I don't know.
Because Enlil is like, he's like, this is the fruit of the tree of good, of the knowledge of good and evil. But it's like, it's knowledge of something, or it's just the fruit, really.
Right.
And
But you look at the idea of,
there's
the
too
tree,
many symbols. Yeah.
The fruit from the tree.
Right.
And the tree of knowledge, and knowledge being having sex with. It's
right.
Like,
and since Enlil doesn't want them to be able to reproduce, it's
pretty
good
graphic.
Yeah. Yeah, and then they're like, ooh, we're naked. Like in the Genesis story, like right after that, they're like, and they start putting leaves on.
Right. They get kicked out of the garden. Then what happens? Eve is pregnant and gives birth to freaking Cain.
Right.
Anyways, that's just a correlation. But the story goes on that Enlil's pretty pissed off about this, but it happens anyway. Enki, quote unquote, breaks the rules down on Earth,
and he's down there in Africa going, come get me. Can't find me.
So sometime later, the Adamu have spread out. Oh, and by the way, I think there's this part of the story where Enlil actually has his own garden, his own place, right?
Yes,
which is supposed to be Eden.
Right. He has the Eden, which is what does that mean? The Eden is actually a Sumerian word.
Right.
Yeah, I can't remember what it is. Like Adam or Adamu.
Right.
Eden means something, and I can't remember what it means.
But he
Garden of the
basically,
Gods.
it's exactly like the biblical story where he gets pissed and he kicks him out of his garden. He's like, no, I don't want them.
Right.
These.
Enlil had Eden, and Enki had Abzu, and Abzu means the abyss or the dark place, and that's people all have sort of correlated that with he was deep in the heart of the Congo, in this jungle in Africa.
Yeah, and other people have correlated that to be the pits of fire, hail.
Right, it's the fires of hell.
Anyway.
The abyss.
So story goes on. The Adamu are reproducing and they're spreading throughout the earth, and they're building stuff and they're doing things, and
Suddenly there's shitloads of them and they're really loud.
right. And Enlil, it becomes clear that the Anunnaki at this point know of some calamity that's about to happen. Right.
And first there's some shenanigans going on with the Anunnaki and the Adamu, because they're basically blood of the blood, right? And there's some mixing going on, which really pisses off Enlil. And I mean, Enki's doing a lot of this too. He's like, man, look at that Adamu chick, and then he makes a daughter with her, and then he sees the daughter, and he's like, and he goes over and gets her. I mean, it tells the story of him doing this to 4 successions of girls, until finally his wife comes out and she's like, stop. Okay, seriously, stop.
Yeah. So throughout this still, you get the idea that these characters live extremely long lives.
Right. They've already been on Earth at this point for hundreds and hundreds of thousands of years, and yeah.
Right. And we've discussed this, many different aspects of this. They get tired of mining. What's the deal? They have the technology to come down here, but then they can't mine stuff.
Yeah, weren't you saying that maybe their technology went more towards biotech than mechanical tech?
I've thought of
why didn't they just make robots?
They were really good at genetic stuff and perhaps building pyramids. But I don't know, but it's they sort of. They have this trouble, and they're with being on Earth. It's just the work is just too hard.
Right,
it's
too much
hard
gravity,
for them. And that's what we were talking
they
about.
They live on a little moon of Nibiru
that's maybe really
giant,
low gravity, and they're very big.
Floaty.
Right, they're very big, and
spend a lot of time in the
their
water.
mass is great. So when they get down here, they're like ugh, and they're laying down.
Right, which is why when you look at we've got to take a break real quick, but when you look at the carvings of them, look at the oldest carvings of them. I'll post some of these pictures to the show notes. They usually are wearing something that goes down to their knees, but you can see their lower legs, and you can see. I mean,
there's mechanical devices on their legs.
They are wearing some kind of supportive exoskeleton.
That's what it looks like. Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean they're huge. When you see them in relation to humans, if the Adamu were our size, which I don't think they were. I think the Adamu were 12 feet, 14 feet high. Then that makes the Anunnaki 30, because they're over twice as tall, right? So they have, and so you get these stories of so we need to take a break. We'll come back to this, and then maybe we'll move into the Sphinx.
All right.
So we're talking about snakes.
Yep. Ancient snakes. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Segment 2 of Hour 1. Two brothers answering answers with questions about questions. Endless conversation about anything and everything, and nothing in particular about, well, except for right now, where we are particularly just trying to question these questions of our listeners. We appreciate you guys listening and asking questions, and we will try to give you more questions in response.
To ask questions about.
So we're talking about the Anunnaki, and I'm reciting the tale of the Anunnaki, according to Zecharia Sitchin and my own thoughts on Zecharia Sitchin's thoughts about Sumerian thoughts, and to the best of my ability. So I would definitely recommend you guys check out The 12th Planet by Zecharia Sitchin. It's a tough read, I've heard. But I listened to a PDF with my phone's computer voice reading it to me, and it was pretty easy.
Yeah.
I listened to it multiple times. I was captivated. I listened to the entire Earth Chronicles series except for I think 2 books, which were my computer voice was unable to recognize the words.
Yeah. If you want like a shorter sort of just a recap of the whole thing without all the planetary stuff or whatever, you can just do Genesis Revisited. I think he kind of does a short.
Oh.
But
Yeah, that reminds me. There's actually an abridged version that's an actual audiobook.
Oh, yeah,
and
yeah,
it's
that's
2
true.
hours long.
yeah, that's true. That's true.
And it's got a really great reader. I can't remember what his name is, but he sounds like Charlton Heston. And
Nice.
it's really cool. It's really definitely worth checking out.
Yeah. Cool.
On a road trip or something.
Even better idea. Yeah.
So where were we? The Anunnaki.
They're interbreeding. This
Yeah.
shit's getting loud. Enlil's like, what the fuck?
Right. So Enlil, the brother of Enki, both sons of Anu, the king on Nibiru, the rogue planet, are down here taking care of business on Earth. They have made mankind, as we know him today, as we are him today.
Or maybe.
Perhaps. I don't know. They've made the Adamu.
Yeah.
And the Adamu are doing the work of the gods, so to speak. They're mining stuff, they're building stuff, they're farming, and they now have the ability to reproduce. And so Enlil or Enki doesn't have to keep using birth mothers to create more and more of the workforce, who is, they have a much shorter lifespan and are dying off and have to continually be replaced. Not to mention deaths associated with whatever hard work they're doing, mining and all that.
Right. Or the like moods of a god, just like swings his arm, he wipes out 10,000 of them.
Right. And we have this phrase called that we use hurling humans.
Yes.
Which is basically when the gods get mad at each other, they just grab a bunch of Adamu and they hurl them at the other god
Right.
with all of his Adamu, and they see who wins. It's
Right.
like
In the beginning, they actually would go and fight each other one-on-one, like mano y mano with with whatever weapons, and like one of them would end up dying. But later on, they realized like, wait, I can just like build up a gigantic army of humans, give them a bunch of metal pointy things, and
hurl them at this other guy. So there's all of these legends of battles where the gods are fighting with men.
Yes.
Men and gods fighting together.
And then you also have to mix in the Watchers and the Nephilim. I mean, like
Right.
we got the mixers, right?
So we're kind of at this point right now where when you look at other texts, there's, like the legends of the Jews and the story of Solomon in the legends of the Jews, there's this account of these 200 quote unquote angels. We associate angels and demons with the Anunnaki.
Right.
They seem to be doing
Some
the
of them
same.
are, the horned, like
Right.
yeah.
They seem to be doing the same actions as the Anunnaki in the ancient Sumerian text. These angels and demons
Yep.
in more modern, they're not modern, later texts.
Yeah.
They act the same way. They look the same. They have horns. Some of them are serpents. Some of them are this or that.
Yep.
So we kind of look at these other texts and go, is that Enki that's doing that guy right there
Is
who
that
built this
Enki?
thing? And
yeah. Like Kantiki Viracocha?
yeah, so there's a story of the 200 that come down onto Mount
Herman.
and they're basically angels that defected or
Yeah,
something
there's some kind of edict that says like, don't fuck with the Adamu. Like,
right, don't mix.
Right, because we must stay pure from them. They are like these weird Earth hybrids. They're the Earthborn.
Right.
But these guys are like, yeah, but they're kind of hot.
Right. So you have these beings that come down and they make a pact with each other. These 200 possibly Anunnaki beings.
Yeah.
That they're going to break the rules. They're going to break the law. They're going to take the quote unquote daughters of man.
Yep.
The daughters of the Adamu to be their wives, and they're going to build cities and they're going to do all this stuff.
And they're
with
going to teach them stuff.
They're going to
too,
teach
yeah.
them. So
Which is also forbidden.
right, forbidden knowledge, not given to man. So they do this thing, and they have children with the Adamu, and then we've talked about that before. Their children were giants,
Right. The people of renown.
right? The men of renown,
Nephilim.
and then the children of those giants were the Nephilim.
Oh, that's right. That's right. The first ones were the Rephaim.
I don't know.
Yeah.
They were they were the giants or something, and they consumed the earth.
Yeah, there's one that says there were 3,000 ells, which is like
right, ridiculous,
140 meters or something like that. I mean, yeah, it's terrifying.
So there's a bunch of mystery surrounding this deal, but in the Sumerian texts, it kind of describes a similar thing where there's interbreeding going on between the Anunnaki and the Adamu, and this is pissing off Enlil, the son of Anu, who is the ruler of the heavens above Earth.
And nominally in charge of the whole Earth operation, even though Enki is like directly in charge of Earth.
Right. Yeah. He's down here on Earth. And so you can see the correlation from the Hebrew text about, God being up in heaven and Satan being down on Earth.
And it calls Lucifer Lord of the Earth.
Lord of the Earth, which was basically Enki's position. So eventually there some perhaps the Anunnaki decide to destroy the planet. I don't necessarily think that was the case.
I think if I remember correctly, they know because of Nibiru's orbital cycle that every time it comes close that there's a lot of changes on Earth, and they know that this time is going to be spectacular.
Right. There's going to be a cataclysm.
And like at this point they're like, okay, shit's out of hand. Like it's really out of hand with all the. I mean, it's like Lord of the Rings on steroids, like, doing meth with crazy fucking shrooms, like it's monsters and like huge, and they're fighting wars and they're eating everything and just destroying the whole planet. So Enlil's like, we got it.
At least that's the way Enlil sees it.
Right. That's true. Yeah.
So Enlil is pissed off about a lot of things having to do with the Adamu and the Anunnaki mixing with the Adamu and all of that. And they know that this calamity, this cataclysm is going to befall the earth, and they are preparing to leave the planet.
Right, to sort of bounce out of the way, go, yeah.
And they hold a meeting and they make everyone agree, or Enlil basically directs this, that everyone agrees not to tell the Adamu.
Right, he forces everybody to speak a vow.
Right.
Yeah.
And they're going to let this destruction destroy the Adamu because Enlil is like, they're too noisy.
Right.
And
we need an eraser.
Right. Gonna wipe them out and start over. And Russ talked about this a little bit before, but basically Enki agrees. He makes this vow, but he devises a way to not break his vow, but still alert the Adamu.
Right.
And he basically gives the quote unquote Noah guy Zasudras, or
I was just listening to it today. It's
Zasudra. Yeah. There's two. That's what I was saying.
That's a different. Two. Yeah, that's not Zisithris. There's
I like the way you pronounce that better too.
Zasudra.
It's easier to say. Zasudra, which is basically Noah, or Unapishtim.
Yeah, is that how you say it?
I think that's it.
Unapishtim. Yeah,
Unapishtim, which is in the Epic of Gilgamesh. He's basically the Noah character too. So there's
it's a lot easier to say Noah.
Yeah, there's all these different names apparently for the same characters all over all of these ancient texts. Like,
and it seems to be because a lot of times they're epithets or they're titles.
That's
right?
true. Yeah.
So like Noah is being called. He was like, he wasn't just some lowly guy. Like Noah was a like he was a human, but he was up there in rank.
Yeah.
So
he was pure in all of his generations.
Right. Righteous.
So basically, you know the story from here. If you know the biblical story of the flood, all of that happens, but some of the humans are saved, and Enlil finds out about this, and he's really pissed off.
There's also the part of the command to record the knowledge and then bury it.
That's true. So you have the Enoch character who is told to make records of all the knowledge and preserve them down here.
And this probably happens all over the world because we see these kind of caches like everywhere.
Right. And there's legends of them.
They're told to the pillars of Enoch being this like idea of like make something that you can find after this destruction. So pyramids, gigantic megalithic, with like immense blocks that are just seem ridiculously huge, unless you think that they need to like survive a massive cataclysm.
A metal library or a stone library.
Right.
Something that can survive.
Yeah.
So anyway, after this cataclysm happens, Enlil is pissed off to discover that the Adamu have been saved through this group of people. Yeah. And the rest of the Anunnaki are like, no, this is a good thing. And they eventually convince him that this is a good thing. And so then he chooses to come down and make a pact with the Adamu.
Right. He makes a pact, and it's also with the Enki and stuff, basically saying, he's like, so we're going to kind of dumb them down. We're going to make them smaller. They're going to live a lot less long.
Right.
And they're not going to be nearly as strong or smart.
Right. And we won't ever destroy you again with water.
Right. With water.
So they give them a rainbow, and they're like, it'll be fire next time. Don't worry about it, bro.
Right. Here's a rainbow. Get out of here.
So this tale of the Anunnaki doesn't really end. Okay. There's always the we're leaving, but we promise to return.
Right.
Right. And then later, there are all of these later recorded activities, like many thousands of years later, where people are seeming to have encounters with these beings that come down from the heavens and start doing a lot of the very same types of things that the Anunnaki did. So we kind of look at the Anunnaki. We kind of group them all together: the Anunnaki, the angels, the demons, and all of those other things, non-human. There's some came from outer space, and we call them Nephis.
Outer space, spirit realm, whatever it is. There is something that happened deep in prehistory that was basically what I like to think of as paleo contact, right?
Yeah.
And whether they made us or not, or whatever happened there, like whether we were here already and they kind of came down here and they were like, hey, look at these tools, I mean, the whole thing with the knowledge, that like Enlil blames everything that happens on that stuff. He's like, look, you guys taught them how to do magic. You taught them like how to do summonings. You taught them, I mean, it was the Prometheus, right?
Right.
He comes down and gives them fire, which is the symbol for tools.
Right. Knowledge.
Right.
So we look at, when we talk about Babel, the Tower of Babel, and the people who came out of the mountains and settled in the land of Shinar. Shinar is Sumer.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
They started building. They came together and they're like, look at this clay.
Yeah.
Let us make bricks and bake them in the sun, and we'll build a tower to the heavens so that we will not be scattered throughout the earth. This is supposedly around 600 years after this flood that nearly destroyed all of mankind.
And it's very interesting too, because it says, let us build a tower whose tops will reach the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves.
Right.
So that we shall not be scattered. I've always puzzled over that phrase. What is this about a name?
Right. I don't know.
A single name for all of people.
Yeah. So we're kind of continuing on this whole story of, it goes into biblical times.
Right.
But we kind of look at it like, okay, if the Sumerians were telling the truth, you take their story as true, that these
to the
beings,
best of their abilities.
Yeah. Whether these beings were human or not, it doesn't matter. The idea is that they were telling the story to the best of their ability. And basically what they said was these beings came down and taught them everything that they know and gave them the ability to do all of these things. And then they were almost destroyed, but they were saved. And then they continued to build and spread throughout the planet. And once again, they encounter the gods that are displeased with their actions, and they're scattered, their languages, wiped out or whatever. Some other strange thing happens to them, and they're scattered throughout the globe. And then on and on through all of these other ancient texts where these beings continually meet with this guy or that guy, and they start fighting these other people.
Yeah, they
and
start doing these weird machinations from behind the scenes.
Right, and there's these gods saying, I'm the only one. And then there's this one over here that's like, I'm the only one. Don't worship any of those other gods.
Yeah.
We're like, wait, you just said you were the only one.
Right.
And not to worship the other ones.
Have no other gods before me because I'm the only one.
Yeah.
Wait.
So there's all these strange things. And that's basically, from my recollection, the best I could do, telling you about the Anunnaki.
Yeah, that's good, and that's good. Like, okay, so it's reflected in, as you get later cultures, you see this sort of the same stuff, but you recognize that they have symbols stacked on top of them.
Right.
Right. Like, I mean, in the earliest Sumerian depictions, it's showing the Anunnaki with their faces, as their faces you can see their horns, you can see their shoulder
Right.
rivers or their whatever, right? You can see their tools or whatever, and you can see the stuff in the night sky. And as time goes on, they start having animal heads. They start like sort of carrying things that symbolize other things. They start. So in other words, there's this weird occulting of the truth that begins to happen almost immediately. And that I haven't been able to figure out if that's because of the amount of time we're talking about here. Because like, think about it. Even if the Adamu had lifespans of 10,000, 20,000 years, the
like the
Anunnaki,
old King's List
the
and
Anunnaki lived for 400,000 before even making mankind. And so like,
And you may think that idea is ridiculous sounding, like nothing's going to live for hundreds of thousands of years. But when you consider the idea of what is a year,
right?
A year is our planet's revolution around its star.
Right.
So if you had another star or another planet that's its revolution around its star took thousands of years.
Yeah, 3,600 years, 10,000 years, whatever. Right.
So 1 year for them, and see, you can imagine if you think of in terms of evolution, that nature would develop on that planet in accordance with its orbit and the cycles of life there.
It would have its own seasons, and it would have its own, and stuff would move according to its cycles. And this is why you see Imla like, God damn it, there's all these humans all of a sudden, because the humans are breeding according to Earth time. The Anunnaki are still on Nibiru time. So to them, it's like every time they turn around, there's millions of humans and they're loud as fuck, right? And he's like, shit, I wipe out 10 million of them and I try to go to sleep and then I wake up and Jesus Christ, they're everywhere, right?
Right. And and you see it again in their sort of promise to return. It's like, yeah, we'll be back.
Right. And then they just leave. Forever.
It's like, what?
Seems like it does. It's like, it's been 5,000 years, man. And they still haven't come back. But like 5,000 years is nothing to these guys. That's not even, that's not even 2 years of their,
Right. So that's kind of the way we look at that. You could say, well, maybe they could live for 400,000 Earth years because.
And there's nothing in biology. Like I had a quote from a biologist that I found. He said that the basic function of a cell is immortality. Like it isn't until you get like I think you say it as eukaryotic cells where they get the telomeres on the ends of their genes that sort of like allows them to count how many times they've divided, right? And once they've done it, they've divided so many times they can't do it anymore, and that is the aging process. Well, before that evolutionary advancement, there was no telomeres and they could reproduce endlessly. I mean, there are amoeba on Earth that are as old as Earth, because like they don't die and they're, it's been dividing over and over and over. So like it has trillions and trillions and trillions of children, but somewhere out there is the original guy. Potentially. And he's like 4 billion years old. And he's like,
he has not evolved yet.
He still doesn't know anything. Can't count to 1.
His brain is not complex enough.
He hasn't even built a brain. He would be like one tiny piece of a brain.
Not complex enough.
Yeah. Doesn't even have, he's just got plasmids. Doesn't even have the decency to like put it in a nucleus or anything. Just like start swapping plasmids. All right. Well, we got a little bit of time left in this segment. So let's look at the Sphinx, because we've talked a lot about the Giza and the pyramids there and the Sphinx. So the basic setup of the Giza Plateau, which is like right next to Cairo in Egypt, is the 3 pyramids that everybody knows about, but nobody, like a lot of people know those pyramids are there, but they don't know what they are. So the one in the middle is not the Great Pyramid. The one in the middle is the Pyramid of Chephren, right? Isn't that a Khafre? It's basically the sun, supposedly, this is mainstream story, the big pyramid in the middle that has the casing stone still left at the very top of it. That was made by the son of the guy who supposedly built the Great Pyramid. Okay, and the Great Pyramid's off to the right or left, depending on where you're looking at. And then there's a smaller one, and I never can say this name. It starts with an M. It's like Minakure or something like that. And that pyramid was supposedly built again by like the uncle of these, right? Of it's still in this family. So you have Khufu supposedly built the Great Pyramid. Khafre, his son, supposedly built the Sphinx and the Khafre pyramid. And the reason they think that is because there's a causeway that connects the Sphinx to his pyramid. All right. And so all these things are connected. There's the Sphinx temple next to the Sphinx and everything. So basically what happens is you have this, if the Sphinx changes in time, because it's interlocked with all of the other stuff and who built what, when, and where, if you change when the Sphinx was built, the fact that it's connected to one of those pyramids by a road topples the idea that this guy, this dude's son built it, which kind of like removes the idea that guy's dad built it. And so it basically just completely destroys the entire story. So Robert Schoch, who is a geologist from University of Boston, went into the Sphinx enclosure. And the Sphinx is basically a humongous statue that's carved out of the limestone bedrock. So they cut a square enclosure down into the bedrock and sort of left the Sphinx in the middle as the statue. Now, the Sphinx itself has undergone tons and tons and tons of repair. Notably, though, the very first repairs are what Schoch calls typical Old Kingdom masonry. But underneath it, the core body of the Sphinx, he says, is heavily weathered. So if it's Old Kingdom masonry, and keep in mind that Khufu and Khafre, all these dudes who were supposedly building these pyramids were Old Kingdom people. Okay, so if masonry contemporary from their time is repairing the core body of the Sphinx, which is already heavily weathered, then you've already got a problem.
Right.
But ignoring that, he looked
Maybe they carved the weathering into it.
They carved it to look old.
Yeah.
So Schoch looked at the enclosure walls, so like looking away from the Sphinx and at the walls of the square enclosure that it's sitting in. And you can Google this and look at those walls. Like, ignore the Sphinx or whatever in the pictures you look, and just look at the walls behind it that you see over its shoulder or whatever behind it. Like, you see these deep fissures and cracks that are vertical. Okay, they're vertical, and almost anybody like who's got a normal brain looking at that knows that that means that the erosion happened vertically. Right. As opposed to horizontal erosion, like you can see in some pictures in Arizona where wind erosion has made these like beautiful, like curving, swerving lines through the limestone.
Horizontal lines.
Right, and they're horizontal. But when you've got deep fissures that are cutting down through a sort of a cliff face or whatever, and then you see the cliff face itself is pillowed out, where you can see like the upper rock is worn away more than the layer below it, and so on and so forth. You know that's water erosion, and the water is running down that rock. So it isn't flowing past it. It's not sitting in it. It isn't wave action. It's actually water that's always constantly running down the cliff and cutting into it. And that's what Schoch basically says. And he also does a bunch of other stuff where he does deep imaging of the floor, so that the floor of the enclosure, and he finds what he calls deep weathering, because sun and rain just like hitting a flat rock surface will sort of begin to eat into it and change its composition from the original hard rock that was like not exposed. So you can tell how old or how long something has been. Well, you can estimate how long something has been exposed by how deep the deep weathering goes. And he says, and it's weird because he says that the front of the Sphinx is much older than the back, which kind of makes sense, I guess, because the enclosure gets deeper to the back. But he basically says that he thinks the core body of the Sphinx was built in stages, that the front was built first with the head and everything like that, and then later on they sort of dug out the back, and the back of it, the butt with the tail, was the very last thing done. And that he says that floor back there in the enclosure is the newest. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Now he says specifically, and I know you were sort of pointing this out, but specifically the erosion, the water erosion, is from rainfall.
Right. Direct. Yeah. It's like specifically
so
and heavy.
The Nile floods every year.
Yes.
Right. And so some people have said, oh, well, it's still flooding in the Nile. No.
Right. And you can see that the Giza Plateau is an uplift of limestone that at one point the Nile probably was really close to it, because the Nile is like swept back and forth and changed its course across a big bed. Yeah.
But according to geologists, like there's very specific and easily recognizable different patterns of erosion.
Right.
Okay. To geologists.
Yeah.
And the pattern that's on the Sphinx enclosure is rainfall erosion, not flooding erosion.
Right. What he calls heavy torrential rains for a sustained period. Yeah. Right. So and like because of paleoclimatology, and a bunch of other, correlating data within geology and climatology and dendrochronology and glaciology and a bunch of other stuff, we know to a pretty good, degree of accuracy when the last time that area in Egypt has had torrential rain, and that was around, the latest would be 9,000 BC, like 9 to 7,000 BC, I think is what he said. But you need 1,000 years of it. So you have to start at 10,000 BC.
Right.
Which is, once you get to 11,000 BC, you're right at the end, the end of the Younger Dryas.
Right.
Which is perfect for torrential rain. Like the end of the Younger Dryas was a cataclysmic thing that something crazy happened and it threw all kinds of water up in the air and changed the whole climate of the planet, into the glaciation, put us into a beautiful warm period, and there was torrential rains after whatever the cataclysm was, probably because
at Giza.
Right. So he also points out a bunch of, we don't need to go into this, but he points out a whole bunch of other stuff all over the Giza Plateau. He's like, look, so there's this quarry over here that supposedly was being dug by this guy, and he was building something over here with it, and you're claiming that is contemporary with the Sphinx, but look at the erosion on the Sphinx versus that, which has almost nothing, right? There's almost no water erosion on that.
So there was another thing that was the blocks that were removed. When they cut the Sphinx enclosure down, they basically cut out huge...
just massive 400 ton.
Yeah, 400 ton limestone blocks and remove them whole, and then use that to build a temple, a quote unquote temple.
Yeah.
Near the Sphinx. Those stones have erosion on them as well.
And it's heavy.
Heavy.
You look
erosion.
at pictures of the Sphinx temple, the Valley temple, and you see and you kind of have to look up, because most pictures are tourist pictures, right? So there's some guy or some girl in the front,
right.
And behind them you see sort of temple stuff. And if you kind of look up above the sharp granite stuff that you'll see in the front, you see these incredibly ancient, heavily weathered, gigantic limestone blocks.
And I think this is right. The way you were saying they cased it in granite, this old kingdom style. They did the same thing with this temple, where they put these granite blocks that the inside of the block, the outside is a smooth face, the inside of the block fits the contour of erosion on the limestone. So they didn't flatten the erosion on the limestone blocks and then put a flat granite casing stone over it. They cut the granite to match the erosion pattern of the limestone on this old temple, and to basically protect it.
And each one of these limestone blocks, basically, 400 tons is almost impossible to conceive of. But think of it as 200 family-sized cars. Each block weighs the same as 200 family-sized cars. Okay, so you stack up all these cars and then crush them down into a block, and then you try to pick that thing up. It's I don't know. Think of a parking lot that has 200 cars in it. And that's one block.
Pick them all up at
one time.
And then stack other
ones.
And
then stack them up to where they're 50 or 60 feet high, and make it to where they have you can't even put, a knife blade in between the seams. And people are like, well, we could do it because it's been done. So look at it right there. So that means that people did it, which means we could do it if we tried, and then nobody tries. And I'm just like, no, I don't think so. Maybe we could do it, but it would be a lot harder than people think. Basically, pushing the Sphinx back that far, like I said, topples the whole house of cards. If the Sphinx is back that far, then that means it's connected to this pyramid over here, which can't have been built by this guy that they say it was built by, which means that his dad couldn't have built the one before it, because that means that this dude's pyramid has been there as long as the Sphinx.
Right.
Which means that but we know that the Great Pyramid was built before this other one, so it's anyway, the whole thing falls apart, which is why they hate it.
Right.
And we're going to take a break, and we'll come back.
One more thing.
All right.
The Sphinx faces due east, right, to the rising sun. Right. Faces the rising sun at the equinox. And Leo, the constellation of Leo in the sky, will rise with the rising sun at the equinox once, every 25,920
every precessional cycle.
years.
Yeah.
The last time it did that was right around that time, 12.
Right around the time that Robert Schoch and John Anthony West were saying.
Dated it with geology.
It was probably being built, right. Like previous to the rainfall, here's where it was being built. Right then was like Leo was rising with the dawn.
Heliacal
yeah,
rising.
Heliacal rising of Leo on the horizon with the sun.
Matches the date that the geologists found in the erosion patterns, basically.
Right. But like the Egyptians didn't know about the
precession. Yeah.
No, yeah, they didn't know about precession. They didn't have the horoscope, the stupid astrology crap. Anyway, we're gonna take a break. Yeah, stupid script tards.
Snake tards.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, Brothers of the Serpent podcast. First segment of the second hour, Snake Bros. Now, were we done with the Sphinx?
What was the question? Just explain the Sphinx enclosure thing? Or?
Yeah, basically just kind of like give that the geology problem there in detail and why it mattered and how, like why the mainstream didn't like it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that was pretty good.
Yeah.
Geology says it's old.
That's
Egyptology
right.
says it's not.
Yeah. There's a lot more.
Geology is always right.
Because geology is a hard science. Rocks are hard.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay, so the next thing we were supposed to that somebody wanted us to sort of explain better is the whole Ice Age deal. Like what is this we keep talking about the Younger Dryas. What is that? What is this Ice Age? 11,000 BC, megafauna, mass extinction. So, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay.
Wait, you want me to start with it?
Yeah, or I can start. It doesn't matter.
You would definitely know it better. I would just say, you really want to get into this, read Magicians of the Gods.
Right.
By Graham Hancock.
And maybe watch some Randall Carlson YouTube videos or something.
Oh, yeah. That would be great.
Yeah. So basically, the present era we're in, like the present geological period we're in, is called the Holocene. Previous to that, it was the Pleistocene. Okay, so the Pleistocene, Holocene, like turnover there there's a catastrophe that happens, and it basically completely changes the climate and the surface of the Earth and the oceans, and it just really rewrites the whole planet. Biology, geology, everything. So around 30,000 to 25,000 BC or so, the most recent heavy glaciation was in full swing. Like that was when it was its most extended. That's called the LGM, or the last glacial maximum. From that point forward, it starts to warm. Like everything starts to kind of warm up, and the glaciers are retreating, melting slowly, and things are changing or whatever for the next 10 to 12,000 years, up until we get to about 13,000 BC when something happens. So at 13,000 BC, the glaciers have retreated extremely far back. The oceans have risen a whole bunch. The ice caps have reduced a lot. So it's as warm as it is now, or maybe even a degree warmer or whatever. And then all of a sudden in a geological eye blink, something happens that causes what is known as an anomalous period called the Younger Dryas. And the reason that name comes from a flower that is, I think it's an Arctic flower that only grows within the Arctic Circle or whatever, that that was, because it got so cold, was growing down in Europe. So they call it the Younger Dryas, meaning like earlier before that, the Dryas flower was, during the heaviest glaciation at 30,000, 25,000 BC, the Dryas flower was found, in Europe or whatever. And then as it became warmer, it retreated to the north, right? And then the Younger Dryas period, wham, suddenly it's back in Europe again, and that sort of is an indication of the climate. So The Younger Dryas is a period that lasts about 1,000 years, give or take. And it's very difficult. It was very difficult for geologists to understand what was going on, because basically you have like the planet is warm, okay, and the glaciers have been melting for 10,000 years or more. And then there's this sudden, like, catastrophic event that causes a lot of meltwater. Okay, so there's a lot of meltwater, but then suddenly the ice just like wham slams. So how do you like start off by melting a lot of ice and then end up by like causing a bunch of new ice almost immediately? So it was a very confusing deal. But like one good answer, and I think this is the answer, but it's still not completely accepted by mainstream, is an impact. Okay, and there's a whole story of like people going out and figuring this out and then publishing papers and then getting like reviled for it and like losing their careers and everything, like, all this stuff over saying like, well, maybe a comet did this. Anyway, we don't need to go into that. The point is that something incredibly catastrophic happened, and they've been finding evidence of it all over the planet. There's a layer that they call the black mat. And it basically contains a bunch of soot, a bunch of weird metals like platinum. There's some iridium. It has a bunch of things called scoria, which is like little bitty sort of spheres of glass, like they're droplets. You can tell that they were melted at very high temperatures. Up, like the melting point of quartz, I think, was like, it's 3,200 degrees Celsius. Okay, so you've got these molten droplets of stone that then fly through the air and then get quenched very quickly, so they very quickly solidify, and then they drop down as these little bitty tiny balls of glass. Then there's also nanodiamonds, which is my favorite. Because like you can kind of explain the soot, you can kind of explain the scoria droplets and maybe the platinum and everything, but you can't explain the nanodiamonds. Because like diamonds are
forever.
Yes, and they're also incredibly difficult to make. It takes a ton of pressure and heat, right? Mm-hmm. And guess what they're made of, by the way? Carbon.
Stupid
so
diamonds
footprints. Are like, compressed death. Well, anyway, so the amount of pressure and heat that it takes to make a diamond, like we've in modern times they can synthesize a sort of diamond analog, but they make it in like very, 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 very thin sheets. So it's like it's not really, they can't make a big fat stone of it, Yeah. They can make like real thin sheets of it that they can break into the slivers, like that they can use for, record player needles and stuff like that, but not much more than that. But nanodiamonds are actually, they have a solid, they're not a sheet, they're not flat or whatever, they're spherical. And there are, I can't remember the numbers on this, but there's something ridiculous, like trillions and trillions and trillions of nanodiamonds scattered all over the planet on this single layer. They found it in Syria, they found it in South America, they found it in Central America and Mexico, they found it in the United States and Canada, they found it in some places in Europe, and presumably they'll keep finding it anywhere they look. It's in this exact same strata that's a couple of inches thick, and it's it basically, these are called impact proxies. So all these different things say that like something slammed into the planet, or many things slammed into the planet, and just erased whatever was here at the time, with giant floods, huge tsunamis, global superstorms, massive rainfall of mud. So like the impacts would throw dust and liquid up into the air, and then it would rain back down as these giant, sometimes cantaloupe-sized, water droplets of heavy mud that would just beat down anything that was in its way. So anyway,
So can I?
Yeah.
Let's see. This, whatever happened, like fried everything, melted a bunch of stuff, made diamonds, made glass out of sand and all of this, and that rained down everywhere, and then it got really cold.
Right. Yeah. And so the idea is because it throws so much stuff up in the atmosphere that it blocks the sun for years.
Okay, yeah.
So then So like you get a huge infusion of heat, which is the impact. It melts a ton of ice, throws crap everywhere, makes a bunch of rain happen and everything. There's floods rolling across the continents because of the ice melting. But because of so much crap being thrown up in the air from the impact, it begins to cool down very, very, very rapidly.
And I guess plus the ice melting, so you'd have a bunch of really cold water now going into the oceans,
running into the oceans,
all the oceans down.
Right. And by the way, that causes there's layers and layers of stuff. Like all the water running into the ocean basins causes the ocean basins to start to sink, which so the land where the ice was starts to rise, and this causes global earthquakes. On every fault line on the planet would fail, every volcano would explode. I mean, it's just like we're talking about. It's unbelievably catastrophic. This is why. So it's this period from the start of this first cataclysm, and then 1,000 years later, there's another one that ends the cold period called the Younger Dryas, and it ends it catastrophically. And this is really the big floods. I mean, where we get what's called the channeled scablands up in Canada, where you can look from Google Earth and you see massive flow lines of where the flood was, like where the water was running off these glaciers in immense. I mean, basically, like Randall Carlson says, you take all of the flows of all of the rivers and all the streams and all the every water flow on the planet. Like you take the Nile, the Mississippi, the Congo, the Amazon, the Yellow River, the Yangtze, the Yanxi, like every river everywhere. And then you multiply that flow by 10 and you still don't have the flow coming off of the Laurentide Glacier, just the Laurentide side on the eastern side of the United States. Okay.
Oh, man.
So yeah, every flow known to the planet, multiply it by 10, and it's not a piece of the flood happening. Okay?
Where's my kayak?
Right. Yeah.
Let's do it.
Where's my freaking surfboard? my kneeboard or whatever. My tube? Maybe just a tube would be great.
Yep. Let's get some tubes and a bunch of beers. Let's do
right. Let's float this river. There's a place up in Canada. It's like above Washington State called the Grand Coulee. And it's basically it's a what's known as a dry cataract. So if you think of Niagara Falls, that's a cataract waterfall, like a bunch of water pouring off of a cliff and cutting it into a horseshoe shape over time,
right? And
then eating that backwards. Niagara,
the center of whatever flow is going to be moving the fastest, and as you move out towards the edges of a water flow, it's going slower and slower.
Right, it becomes shallower and goes slower. Yeah.
So it always cuts a horseshoe shape.
Yes, because the middle, the water moving the fastest and being the deepest cuts deeper, right? So it makes this horseshoe shape. I think Niagara's moved 7 miles in the past 10,000 years. It's retreated something like that, 7 miles up the, but the cataracts at Dry Falls in Grand Coulee are, I don't know, 10 times the size of Niagara, and there's multiple ones of them. There's a bunch of horseshoe cup shapes you can see in the cliffs, and they're humongous. I mean, they're just gigantic. And Randall Carlson says that they were probably completely made in less than 2 weeks. The entire formation was made. And he says, you have to remember that we're not talking about like Niagara is like water and it's pretty water. It makes mist and everything. This is like thick mud. It has entire forests jumbled up and blended into it, rolling. And then at the bottom, and this is the most serious part, are boulders some up to the size of like huge houses, like 2-story, 8-bedroom houses, are rolling along the bottom.
And they were much bigger when they started.
Right, because this torrent is like grabbing bits of bedrock from everywhere it passes, and and then everything in it is running into the bedrock and it's plucking it. He says he uses the term plucking. So it's going along, it tears up everything in front of it, all the way down to the bedrock, and then starts eating the bedrock. Okay, you can see there's places called there's a place, it's fascinating, very strange looking, called Potholes Canyon up there, where basically you've got this canyon where you can tell that water was like tearing through it at some ungodly rate. And he says it was going 60 or 70 miles an hour because of the back pressure. All the water behind it was pushing it that fast, right? And like most rivers today are like 10, I think it's 7 miles an hour. So you got like thick, nasty mud with giant boulders in it and whole forests, going 70 miles an hour. It's just, and thousands of feet deep. So they as they go around turns or corners or whatever, or are being forced to like squeeze through gaps, like at Wallula Gap, they will develop these tornadoes in the water, basically, that stand there, and they just, it gets logs and all kinds of crap in there, and it just eats down into the bedrock and makes these gigantic potholes in the basalt. So you have these like hundreds of meters wide and like hundreds of meters deep, just like perfect circular fucking hole going down into the bedrock on the bottom of these canyons. And they're in the walls and everything because
the tornadoes are all
going all over the place and just
That's
eating.
insane.
Yeah, it is crazy looking. And it's like you begin to get the magnitude of this cataclysm. And one of the best ones that Randall Carlson uses is like to finish off the sort of try to get people to understand the scale is the big rock. Okay, so on the eastern side of the Rocky Mountains in Canada, there is a glacial erratic, which that's what they call it. But a glacial erratic is basically like glaciers as they slide along will pick up rocks and boulders, and the boulders will get buried into the ice. So the glacier will kind of carry it. Sometimes hundreds of miles from where the rock came from. And then when the glacier melts, it just drops it wherever that was, right? Well, there are also flood erratics where you have like a catastrophic flood, like what we're talking about, and the ice has been broken. It's been shattered by this cometary impact. So like also in the water, along with the trees and the boulders and everything else, are humongous chunks of ice.
Yeah, Titanic sinking chunks of ice.
Right, Titanic sinking chunks of ice that are like acting like rafts. So like as the flood waters roll up against a mountain valley and they start knocking, it carries this huge chunk of ice up close to the top of the mountain and hits some big outcrop and knocks off some gigantic chunk of rock that lands on the ice and it rafts it. Okay.
Oh man.
So the big rock, Randall Carlson.
Damn it!
Yeah.
I want to see this happen, but not really.
Right. You need to watch it from space. Randall Carlson estimates that the big rock weighs about 18,000 tons. So because of that, and because we know the makeup of ice, we can estimate how big of a floating glacier iceberg we would need to float this 18,000 ton boulder, which is now broken into 3 pieces where it was dropped. And by the way, when you look at the valley where it's dropped, it's way, 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 way up the valley wall. So that tells you how high the flood was, okay? It's not dropped down to the bottom of the valley. It's way up on the wall of the valley. It's like up, so you see that the entire valley, first of all, had to be filled with water. And a iceberg that was basically the size of the largest oil tankers. Okay, so these gigantic oil tankers, think of that. That's how big of an iceberg you would need to have to float this 18,000 ton boulder.
That's about 24,000 family sedans worth of rock.
24,000.
Just using the old
right.
rock weight versus family sedan comparison.
Right. Oh my God. Yeah, and when you can look this up. It's just called the Big Rock. When you look this up, it's actually in an erratic field. So the valley there is full of huge boulders that were dropped by icebergs, and you can tell that they were not the normal sort of glacial erratics because those are all very smooth and rounded because as being buried in the ice and then just being rolled and ground on for thousands of years rounds them all off. Whereas these get knocked off their outcrop during the flood and then get floated for a couple of days and then dropped so they all have sharp edges. So the Big Rock has very, very sharp edges. It's all blocky. It's not rounded off. So you can tell that it was this kind of like crazy, Neolithic surfing boulder, not a, it wasn't a sleeping rock.
The ice giants brought it.
Right. So, that's basically the secondary cataclysm. So you have to imagine that the first cataclysm starts the Younger Dryas. It like causes a bunch of melting, throws a whole bunch of dust up into the air and everything like that, causes like global firestorms and everything like that, and then darkness for months probably. And I mean complete darkness. There will be so much stuff in the atmosphere that you can't see the sun at all. It's not hazy, you just can't see it. It's pitch black. Everything freezes, stays that way for 1,000 years. Then more bombardment happens again on the ice sheets in Europe and North America. Because at this point, the ice sheets have grown almost to where they were 30,000 years before. They're almost all the way fully
back to the
extended. Right. So when the impacts happen on the ice this time, there's a lot of ice.
Holy shit.
And I mean, most of Canada and northern the United States was 2 miles. 2 miles of ice. Like, think of that.
2 miles thick.
Like, go outside and then go up 2 miles. And then you'd be on top of the ice. And see, there's other catastrophic things that happen. I'll touch on briefly just because they're
The wall.
right. They're crazy. Yeah, and there are Native American legends of living near what they call the frozen lands, and so they have all these weird legends of there's this catastrophe and there's fire and everything. They have to go underground. When they come back up, they see mountains everywhere, and they're like, what? And you realize that they knew of the ice. They couldn't see the mountains.
Yeah.
Because it was just like this wall of white, right? They live near the frozen lands. And when all the ice is gone, they're like, holy crap, there's mountains. They realize they're surrounded by mountains. It's like really interesting. Anyway, mainstream geology does not like this impact catastrophic thing. They just don't like catastrophic anything in geology. They like uniformitarian, like one drop of water, one grain of sand at a time. Like everything takes millions of years.
Yeah.
Boring. Right, boring. And Randall Carlson says, and I agree with this, there's probably a mix of uniformitarianism and interspersed with bouts of catastrophic. I mean, like it has to be.
Right. Agreed.
Like we've had this long 10,000 year interglacial, but it's going to be bracketed by catastrophes, right? One at the beginning, one at the end. It's like unavoidable. So anyway, the mainstream idea is they like glacial lakes. I can't remember the Iceland term for it, but basically you get a glacial lake that's caused by a damming of ice. So downstream, ice and a bunch of other stuff sort of jams into a narrow area, blocks everything, and causes a natural dam. Water builds up behind it, sometimes builds up a lot behind it, and then eventually the dam breaks because of the pressure of the water, and then there's a sort of a catastrophic outflow. And this can happen over and over and over again. This is what mainstream has tried to say happened. They're like, no, there wasn't this giant single catastrophic thing. It was like a bunch of up to 80, I think, of the drainings of the Missoula flood or the Missoula, or what is it called? The glacial lake up there.
Yeah. Lake Missoula, I believe.
Yeah. Lake Missoula. And Randall Carlson just completely destroys this very simply by saying, well, for one of these floods that they're talking about, you can go out there and look at the water levels, and you can see because of the old shorelines where the water level reached that it was about 2,000 feet deep. So at the base of what would have been the ice dam, the pressure per square inch would have been something around 900 pounds per square inch, which is basically, if you go to a square foot, it's about the weight of a Sherman tank. So if you take take a cubic foot of a block of ice and then put a Sherman tank on top of it, what happens? Right? So you can already see that that's impossible. No ice dam will hold 2,000 feet of water in Missoula. It just won't do it, which means that can't, but we can see the shorelines up there. So we know that something was happening, but it was not an ice dam. It was backflow, right?
So there's so much water that the water is doing its own damming.
Yes, it's backing up, right? So there's that. So that kind of just debunks the whole glacial lake. But there's another kind of glacial lake that fascinates me, and this must be to see any of this stuff would be terrifying. But this in particular, so on top of glaciers during like long warming periods, like what happened before the first cataclysm. So you have from 30,000 BC up to the first cataclysm at 13,000. There was just a lot of warming that was happening that was sort of gradual. It was really still really fast, but more gradual than it wasn't a single event. So you can imagine on top of these humongous ice sheets that are miles thick or whatever, that pools of meltwater will develop on top of the ice, and they can be immense. Okay. So like you have this humongous glacial lake on the glacier. Okay. Then and they'll be at all levels, right? So, and you could view the glacier basically in terms of water as like one in some direction, probably south. If you're talking about the North Pole is down, right? South is down. Like the ice gets thinner going south. So there's this, and remember 2 miles. So there is a 2 mile drop on ice, which is like slick, right? So you have this huge pool of water, and there's bunches of them. And we're like, let's say that something happens to one up high where one of the walls kind of caves in a little bit, and all the water kind of pours out of there, right? It just kind of comes out. It'll spread out into this long arc, and it'll be a single wave that starts to roll down the glacier. It'd just be a bump of water, but it'll pick up every like depression that it runs into that has more water. It picks that up, picks up more. And by the time it reaches the ground level, like time that reaches 2 miles down at the bottom of the glacier, it's going hundreds of miles an hour and is thousands of feet tall.
God, that's crazy.
Okay, this is called a glacial wave. This is like the most terrifying thing. I mean, you know, the ice isn't even melting. You're down there living, whatever, and it's just suddenly. I mean, like, what do you do? There's a wall of water, so tall you can't even recognize it. So that's basically the end of the Pleistocene into the Holocene. This also wipes out all the megafauna. This is what kills off the
Wait, what does?
These two cataclysms.
Okay,
this period, the Younger Dryas cataclysmic period.
I gotcha.
It kills the mammoths, the mastodons, the American Pleistocene lion, the giant beavers, the giant armadillo that was like the size of a Volkswagen, the short-faced cave bear, which was like something terrifying, like 12 feet tall at the shoulder. All this stuff. I mean, you know, the giant beaver was, I think, 600 pounds. I bet he built some badass dams.
Yeah.
The American Pleistocene lion was like a large predator cat the size of a horse, basically a small horse, that's terrifying. I'm kind of glad that they're gone because damn.
Big kitties.
Yeah, big kitties. That play with mammoths for food, slapping mammoths around. So all that stuff dies out, and that's why, like, in the area we live, we have mastodon bones and mammoth bones stuck in the limestone around here, you know. And like there's still a fight right now about what killed them, because there's a group of people that want to say humans did it, that it was, you know, a small roving.
Well, who killed all the other ones?
Right. What about
the other
who
animals?
killed all the lions and the short-faced bear and the beavers and the, like, why, you know, and why would they do that? Like, why
In such a short period of time, like.
Right. Small roving bands of terrified humans that came across the Bering Strait supposedly wiped out 50 to 100 million ectoderms,
Right,
like
and
giant elephants.
And not to mention that whatever this cataclysm was with the climate also affected the humans.
Right. By the way, the Clovis people, like, and if you've done any kind of arrowhead hunting, people have heard of Clovis. They have these beautiful fluted spear points and stuff. The Clovis people disappear after the end of the Younger Dryas. There's the black mat layer, and there is no Clovis stuff found above it, unless it's like been carried by somebody else later on, right? In other words, we have Clovis sites, and then there's this black layer of soot, and then no Clovis. They got wiped out.
Yeah.
Almost, I mean, entirely as far as the evidence goes now. And that's because probably there were global firestorms. Like the entirety of North America from the second impact, all these molten droplets go splashing upwards and then come raining down all over the United States and set everything on fire. All the forests, all the grasslands. So before the floods come rolling through and pick up all the soot and the you know, everything behind it, first the wave of fire rolls through.
So you're saying the end of the Younger Dryas is what killed the Clovis people, or?
Yeah.
Okay, so there's the black mat layer, and then on top of that is the Clovis culture.
No, like there's the Clovis stuff, and then there's the black mat layer.
I thought the black mat layer was caused by the first, like, that caused the Younger Dryas.
I think there's two. Well, I mean, like, I know that they're looking at the one from the beginning, but there's also impact proxies at the second part, because that's also catastrophic.
Right.
But yeah, you're right. The actual, like, named, quote unquote named black mat is the first one.
And the Clovis stuff is on top of that.
That's
no,
I mean, well, maybe it is. Maybe it is on top of that, directly on top of it. But then it all ends with another layer of soot. So, yeah. I don't know. I thought the black mat layer was on top of the Clovis stuff. Basically, I just listened to that part in Magicians of the Gods. He basically says, you have Clovis, you have this layer, and then no Clovis after that.
Yeah,
and then the Folsom people show up a couple of thousand years later, whoever they are.
Yeah.
So it was, I mean, you know, this was a catastrophic. So this is whenever we're referencing the end of the Ice Age, and you have, like, if we're right about the timing of some stuff, the Sphinx, some of the older pyramids in Egypt, some of the stuff down in Peru, and a lot of the weirder, basically more mysterious, you know, buildings all over the planet are probably being built in some way or another around this time, because this is also the time of Leo, processionally.
Right.
This is like Leo, and So
Right. So within the, what do they call it? The margin of error.
yeah,
All of these times line up, like the processional alignments with a lot of these ancient sites, and the drill cores and stuff
Yes.
from studying all this stuff all point to this same time period,
Right.
of some cataclysmic destruction and then possibly a rebirth.
right. And interestingly, Plato, when discussing Atlantis, through his characters in the whatever the writing he did about this, pinpoints this time also.
Right.
Is like he said it was 9,000 years before the time of Solon. Solon was like 6,000 BC or 600 BC, which puts it at like 9,600, which is right in the ballpark. So
Right.
how did he do that
Right
by
at the
accident?
time that this mysterious, ancient, highly developed city vanishes under
Right.
water.
Civilization vanishes, like just disappears, and he says in a single night, which is basically what we're talking about here. Like there's an impact, and then the next day, everything changes.
Right.
All right, so we're going to take a quick break, and we'll come back with the last segment. And I don't know what we're going to talk about for that, because I think we've covered.
I know what we're going to talk about.
All right, sweet.
Snakes.
Next.
I don't care when I get out of here, and that's a lie that I tell. Well, let it fall on closed eyes and deaf ears, just as long as you can tell.
Two brothers in a cube. Forever detangentizing. Never going off in tangents. Snake Bros. We're back.
Snake Bros.
Last segment. And I just want to kind of do a run through here and sort of tie all this together in the way that we have, after many years of looking into these various different topics, begun to look at the world with these eyes, as we would call it, after learning all this stuff. So we've got this massive cataclysm in pretty recent history, especially compared to what typically is understood as the standard model of human development. This is right in our historical backyard, as they say. Massive flooding and destruction of the world. And going back to the Anunnaki, you have the destruction of the world, which the Adamu are not to know about because somebody hates the Adamu and they want them gone. So we've got the flood myth that is pretty much worldwide. All over the world, there are all these different myths talking about a massive flood that nearly wiped out humanity. And you have these beings, quote unquote gods, who are down on the earth, mingling with man, doing things, and then they nearly destroy us. And yet we survive. And they sort of allow us to do this, but under new terms, a new deal. So the new deal is we don't live as long and we don't seek knowledge and we'll be okay. And they're going to leave and they'll return at some later date in which the world is supposed to be destroyed again at that point. So
With fire.
yeah, with fire. So the way we kind of look at this, or the way I've been looking at it, is this idea that the world is going to be destroyed by a cataclysm, a coming cataclysm, and that the overwhelming amount of evidence that cataclysm will actually come from the heavens and rain down upon us fire. Modern science is looking out at the skies and finding millions and billions of large things out there flying around. We have we know of two comets that and multiple massive asteroids, along with a ton of smaller asteroids out there that the Earth passes through in its orbit around the sun every year, multiple times. We call these the various meteor showers that we have. What are they? We got the Taurids,
The Geminids, the Leonids, they're all named by
the zodiacal constellations, basically.
because they appear to come out of one of those constellations, so that the Taurids appear to radiate outwards from the shoulder of the bull, and the Leonids appear to radiate out from the head of the lion, so on and so
Right.
forth. Yeah.
So we have these 12 constellations, all their names, the bull, all of the symbolism associated with them, the lion. Then we have all of these ancient sites all over the world that and ancient religions and traditions by various different peoples that at one point or another they're worshiping cows.
Right.
They're worshiping the bull. These other people worship the lion.
Yeah.
The lion is the king. Blah blah blah. You have the Sphinx, which we've just talked about, is lined up pointing at Leo, roughly about the same time as this last cataclysm that we had.
Right.
And then, particularly with the Anunnaki, you have these beings. Forget whether they're aliens or humans; it doesn't matter. The point is they are a force, a very powerful force, and pretty much the prevailing side of the fight between the Anunnaki is wanting mankind to be kept down.
Right.
They do not want us, becoming like them. So
Right.
there are various different quotes of the Bible we talked about, like, God looks down at Adam and Eve after they've partaken of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and says, "What if they then eat of the fruit of the tree of life? They will become like us."
Yeah.
So he kicks them out of the garden, puts the flaming sword in front of the tree of life. We look at this possibility of a coming cataclysm, and there's all of this evidence that it's going to come from space.
Yeah.
And yet we are bombarded every single day about how we are causing
Right.
the coming cataclysm. And that in order to save ourselves, we must stop doing all of this development that we've been doing.
Yeah. I mean, it's our very breath,
Right.
our exhales.
Right. CO2.
Yeah.
All of our energy sources release this terrible thing. And so we must stop doing all that. And it just, when we talk about these massive conspiracy theories of, some sinister force that's trying to keep us down or trying to stop the progress of mankind, the reason why we're saying that is because we're analyzing all of these events and putting them together. You have the Anunnaki, who are like one side of one faction of them is recorded to have wanted this very thing
Yeah.
from man since the beginning. And it's like we see what's going on today, and all of this sort of this focus on this navel gazing about how we are doing all of this destruction when nature has engaged in far, far greater destructions that we could never even imagine creating, even with all of our atomic bombs.
Right.
So that's one connection that I can think of.
Yeah. That's a big one. That really, I mean, when you start to see that picture, it completely rewrites your ideas on a lot of stuff. A lot of stuff. And this just occurred to me, but I meant to mention this before, in terms of like trying to get a scale of the cataclysms we're talking about. Anybody who has time, get on Google Earth, roll that ball around to the east coast of Madagascar and look at the coastline, and you'll see these wavy lines that extend inward. Those wavy lines are actually huge hills that are 600-700 feet high of rubble, rocks, sediment, stuff like that. They're from tsunamis.
Yeah.
And you can see that they rolled miles and miles and miles inland to Madagascar, carrying all this stuff. So they must have been at least 600 feet high just to drop the hills there. You can scroll across the Indian Ocean from Madagascar 4,000 miles away to the west coast of Australia and see the same wave patterns on their coastline over there. And then you begin to understand, like, what kind of splash we're talking about. Something hits the deep part of the Indian Ocean, and they've just found it's called the Burkle Crater. It's 2 miles down there, whatever. It's this gigantic crater. So something plowed through the Indian Ocean and like sent humongous tidal waves that splashed into to Madagascar and Australia, probably about 6 to 8,000 years ago. Not that long ago, like since the end of the Younger Dryas.
Yeah. So this is one thing that one of the reasons why I go conspiratorial on this whole thing about the destruction of the world.
Yeah.
Is because I guess for me, it seems totally plausible that we could have an impact that causes a global cataclysm at any time. Like, why is it that the science of geology wants, you look at the history of its development, and there's this movement that wants to not let that be the case. And even though there's mounting evidence for it. And then, we just have these massive freaking craters like the one in Arizona.
Right.
They're huge. And it's like, this thing came down and hit, but that ain't going to happen.
Right. And if you look at the Gulf of Mexico, if you kind of zoom out and look at that, that's 2 circles overlaid.
Right.
That kind of make the,
One of the I'm sorry to interrupt you, but one of the reasonings that they use is like, well, these massive ones that wiped out all the dinosaurs and everything, they happened so long ago.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so the longer it doesn't happen, the higher
likely,
the probability is that it's going to happen.
Right. What they call the KT barrier, the Cretaceous Tertiary, which is the borderline there where the dinosaurs get wiped out. That impact is so ridiculous that, I mean, like, if anybody who's dropped a pebble in still water, you see the splash and it makes that little what would you call that?
A little droplet in the middle that rises up.
The splashback,
Yeah.
So that happens because the Earth is functionally like a ball of liquid when something that big going that fast hits it. And they estimate that the reverse splash of molten stone for the impact in the Gulf that wiped out the dinosaurs was 10 miles high. A tower of molten stone went bloop, bloop, and splashed back up 10 miles high. Okay, and the reason so somebody was spelunking.
If you recorded the sound and you raised its frequency really, really high, it would sound just like that.
Yeah, it would go bloom, bloom, bloom. Actually, if anybody who's interested in that kind of stuff, go look at the Wikipedia has a whole list of anomalous sounds that have been recorded by all the hydrophones in the ocean. Like one of them is called the Julia, one of them is called the Bloop, and they're incredibly low frequency, but they speed them up so you can hear them, and they sound like that. And I'm like, that something just splashed out in the ocean. Probably
wow, that's cool.
And then it goes. I'm like, yep, that was something else. Some big ass rock splashing down in the ocean somewhere in the Pacific where nobody was around, and sending out anomalous waves that destroy ships out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Right. Anyway. So yeah, I mean, it's, I don't know. My mind keeps getting stopped by this 10-mile tall tower of molten stone. And it's interesting how they could tell that because there's actually a second ring in the crater. Right, because the first crater ring is made from the impact, and then that tower collapses and makes a second one, then they can tell how big it was. 10
That's crazy.
miles high. I wonder if it had the little droplet above it.
Yeah. Yep. It's Cuba.
Yeah. But that is why the Yucatan, like bedrock, all that limestone, it's shattered. It's just like it's shattered like glass, and that's why they have the cenotes, the deep holes with the water in them in the middle of the jungle.
Huh.
Yeah.
So another connection we both talked about before is the old Norse myths of the ice giants, and we spoke about this before. The ice giants are the glaciers.
Yeah.
Right. That came down. And so this idea, and then you also have the dragon.
Right.
The dragon.
The dragon was India.
Right.
Yeah, so that was their Indian legends. They had the dragon in the mountains holding everything. Yeah.
Right. And so you have this myth that passes down where there's the man who destroys the dragon, right, to save the princess or whatever.
Right. Yeah.
And so you look at the symbolism of that, and man, the knight or whatever who destroys it is mankind, and the princess is Mother Nature.
Right. Life. Yeah.
Right. And so the dragon, the serpent in the sky, is the coming comet or asteroid or whatever. And
Right.
and the thing is it's indestructible.
Yeah.
There's no arrow that can pierce its armor. There's
Right.
nothing.
It's unstoppable.
Right. So
Yeah.
it's this idea that mankind could become capable of destroying this dragon before it kills the princess, before it wipes out Mother Nature as we know it.
Wow.
We are there.
Right. And how does it always have to be done? No, you can't. No sword, no spear, whatever. Right. Right. So that he always has to outwit.
He always
it.
has to outwit the dragon.
That's right.
So it's so cool to me that this story is it's ancient. This idea, the symbolism in the idea.
Modern
But
myth.
but if you look at it in this way, we are at this point right now where we could literally go out into space and stop something that was going to come and destroy us,
Right.
to wipe out Mother Nature. And yet we're not looking for that. And we're that'll never happen, blah, blah, blah. We're fooling ourselves.
What does the guy say in Armageddon? He's like, well, the Skywatch budget allows us to watch about 2% of the sky. And beg your pardon, sir, but it's a big goddamn sky.
Right. because NASA's budget recently was diverted
Right.
to dealing with
Political
anthropogenic global
yeah.
warming.
and another politically correct crap.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
So I think that's a really cool idea.
Now, what was it you were saying earlier that we have all these natural disasters that take like hurricanes, tidal waves, earthquakes, volcanoes, all these kind of natural disasters that when they come, we can't do anything about. We don't know how earthquakes work. We can't
Right.
stop. We can barely detect them before they hit us. Like volcanoes, the same deal. Like maybe we'll be able to harness.
We're all sitting there looking at the volcano smoking like,
Yeah.
it might go off.
Right.
It
will go
maybe
off, yeah.
eventually it's definitely going to eventually.
Right. And then just one day we wake up and it's when it's going off and
Yeah.
you just have to leave. You
Right.
can't do anything about
Can't
it.
do anything about it.
Tidal waves, you just run.
Right. So
Higher
an
ground.
impact, a big enough impact from outer space is capable of causing all of those things to happen.
Right.
Earthquakes, volcanoes, firestorms, tornadoes, tidal
yeah.
waves, hurricanes,
Superstorms, yeah.
all over the world with one impact. That we can actually stop.
Yeah, the impact thing, we can do something
Right.
about it.
We can actually do something about that.
Right.
And, I just watched this Randall Carlson video where he was pointing that out, and it's very passionately so.
Yeah. And it's also extremely frustrating because like we already see this impetus like for some companies, like they're like, we want to get up there and mine. Like let's take our most destructive industries off planet. Mining, like no one likes to look at a strip mine, but we all need the stuff in the strip mine. Well, let's go out and strip mine asteroids where no one cares, right? There's no golden cheek warbler or purple spotted gnat on that freaking asteroid, and we could just blow it apart, I mean, there's all different interesting ways to mine asteroids. Like one of my favorite ideas was that you drill a hole all the way through it, you put gigantic bags of water in the middle of the hole, and you plug both ends, and then you like aim a giant solar mirror at it and heat the whole thing up, and then like it sort of becomes molten, and then when those bags of water in there become steam, it goes woo and makes it big shell balloon. Then you let it cool off, and you just go inside, and you're like. You have a bubble basically now that you can just get the metal out of. Anyway,
That's pretty badass.
yeah, it's pretty cool. There's all kinds of interesting things you can do with zero G with mirrors and magnets. But yeah, so and then the easiest ones to mine are the most dangerous ones because they come the closest to Earth.
Right.
So we don't even have to go up there with like, we've got to stop these asteroids from hitting us. No, just send some miners up there. They'll take care of it.
Taking out 2 stones with 1 bird.
Yeah, they'll put them in lunar orbit. 2 stones with
One
what?
bird.
Oh,
We're flying up there. Take out 2 stones.
right. That's right. And the bird is the phoenix.
Yeah.
And think of the phoenix symbolism. This is another cataclysmic symbol. Like the
the development
child of the phoenix,
beautiful thing,
right? The child of the phoenix rises up from the ashes of its parent. This is
Right.
the earth. This is the symbol of earth over and over.
right?
Another thing this makes me think of, and I've been thinking about this a lot, the dolmens, the mysterious rock formations that we see in all over Europe and in Russia and everything, where you basically got 3 or 4 rock and this gigantic one on top of them.
Right.
If we were having huge air bursts, like if there was a series of like, so during the Younger Dryas period, if it wasn't just like one impact here and then at the other end of it an impact here, but it was a period of bombardment, which is probably more likely.
Right.
You know, we're in some kind of comet stream and it keeps like nailing us over and over. But most of it's going to be chondrite meteorites, not the metal ones. Like in Arizona, it was a metal thing which hits.
Yeah.
Well, if they're chondrite ones, like what happened over Siberia, they blow up in the air.
Right.
And so no rock hits the ground, but it just sends this ridiculous shockwave of heat and death towards the, it blows up 25 miles up and you see this like shockwave coming down and it just flattens everything. But if you put like a gigantic stone above your head,
then at least you'll die
and then
quickly.
because there's a lot of Native American legends that talk about this, that where some eagle comes and tells them dig a hole, right? And then like cover yourselves over in that hole and put like the thickest logs and the biggest stones you can find on top of that, and then like stay in the hole and put your hands on the ceiling and don't come out until the ceiling cools down, because they feel it heat up. And then it gets so hot that they're worried that it's going to burn through, but it doesn't. It begins to cool down, and when they come out, it's a completely different world.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So you see these dolmens, and basically a lot of them were mounds. There was a whole mound of earth, and the rocks were all inside of it. Well, all the earth has been washed away, and now we just see the rocks standing there. But it's the same idea.
Yeah.
That somebody was
shelter.
throwing these shelters up all over the planet, and they're like it looks like they were done by giants, but they also look makeshift. Like, give me that rock, and stack this one on top, and get under the right now. We've got to do it now. I don't know. I think that's an indication of these huge air bursts that were causing all this stuff. So
yeah. So also we have Göbekli Tepe in Turkey,
right,
which has been more recently discovered, and they've got very accurate for archaeological purposes carbon dating on it that put it right about this time at the end of the last cataclysm,
right,
roughly 12,000 years ago.
And because it was buried, unlike almost every other megalithic structure all over the planet, this was specifically buried right after they finished building it. It wasn't contaminated by later cultures.
Right. And it has depictions of all these animals on it and all of this stuff. And there's depictions on it that are constellations that are zodiacal constellations. One pinpointing the center of the galaxy.
Yeah.
So going back to the Sphinx, pinpointing the constellation of Leo, roughly 12,000 years ago, somewhere around there, and then a whole lot of other places, like all these different ancient sites pinpointing this time. It's like they came out after this destruction, and there was a new world,
right?
And this is where we refer to this ancient saying, "As above, so below." Like the way they put the pyramids, they set up the pyramids in Giza to the arrangement next to the Nile matches the arrangement in the sky of the Orion's belt to the Milky Way.
Yeah.
And when you rewind the sky to where it actually mirrors it, it's roughly 12,000 years ago.
Right.
So even if the pyramids were built later, they're still building them in such a way where they're pinpointing this time.
Right.
And
somebody at least laid the foundations.
Right. It's over and over and over. We see these correlations to this time period where this happened, where, science is now saying that something
incredibly catastrophic. Yeah.
And then you throw in all of the myths, the quote unquote myths that go along with it about multiple days of darkness, where they could not see the sun and the sun went away or whatever,
right.
The sun went out.
Right.
And
that a dark cloud descends and the sun was a pale imitation of itself and then disappeared entirely.
Right. The walls of Jericho coming down to it, the sounds of trumpets and Sodom and Gomorrah being fire rained down on them and things turning into pillars of salt and all of this kind of stuff. And then the Indians, have the Native Americans have so many myths about
previous worlds.
Previous worlds and destruction of the planet and all of this stuff.
Yeah,
it's everywhere.
The Hopis say that they followed a cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night into the desert, where they were taken underground by what they call the ant people and kept underground for a long period of time, generations, while the earth above was destroyed and remade into the earth now, which is they call the glittering world. And then when they emerged, it was in the Grand Canyon, which had not existed when they went down.
Right. You have the story of Exodus, where they follow a cloud by day and
a pillar of
fire by night.
Yeah.
And then they cross an ocean that suddenly dried up.
Right.
Right.
And then they go into a land of giants.
Or not an ocean, a sea.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a sea there. The sea goes away. They walk across. The sea comes back and wipes out the Pharaoh. Yeah.
And then, so along with all of this, we've talked about on the show all of these things that point to precession, the numbers, the symbolism in the zodiacal constellations, the 12 zodiac, the 12 zodiacal constellations, the 12 disciples or apostles. All of these things that connect to this idea of the heavens. They're always pointing to the sky. They're always saying we'll see it in the heavens.
Right.
There's all of this stuff. And
it is obvious. There's also the sort of like the kind of growing idea that the ancients were obsessed with the heavens. Like they built astronomical calendars, and observatories everywhere. They threw them up everywhere. I mean, like there's one of the oldest ones. They call it Adam's calendar. It's in somewhere out in the desert in Egypt. It's just stones that are like a couple of feet high, but there's hundreds of them. And when you start to look at the alignments, you start to see that somebody knew what they were doing, and they were stacking these things up Stonehenge style, but they were just little flat rocks they were finding in the desert, standing them up because that marked this. And
how do we leave out Stonehenge? Stonehenge, is a processional clock,
right?
So it's like they're
marking.
They're
something.
all telling us something. Like they are sending a message through time.
They're like, look at space
to us to look at space because, and then in the myths, the end is coming.
Right. So you have like through the buildings, we have like, look at this time a long time ago. And then also look at space.
Right. Look at this time a long time ago. And by the way, everything is cyclical.
Right. And look at space. And then you start to see, okay, wait a minute. They're pointing to this time in history. And they're saying that everything is cyclical. And they're saying, look at space. So you start to get and then as above, so below, you start to get the idea. And by the way, were you going to mention the Göbekli Tepe thing where it's pinpointing?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So all these markers that Kyle's been talking about, all these buildings, all these Stonehenge, everything, they're all referencing this ancient time, the time of Leo, the 12,500 BC, whatever, the end of the Younger Dryas or the beginning of it, this cataclysm. But on one of the big T-pillar stones that they found at Göbekli Tepe, there's a series of therianthropic plus animal relief carvings in it that basically look like a map of the zodiacal sky, okay? And because of precession, you can sort of roll everything around and time it, and it's actually pointing to now.
Right.
So this, like, 12,000-year-old monument, or this monument that was buried 12,000 years ago, okay, we don't know how actually how old it is. The dating comes from the time of burial.
Right.
So 12,000 years ago, it was buried on purpose by hand, meticulously, has carvings on it that pinpoint now.
Right.
Like with
give or take,
like 40 years past, past or future. And it's basically looks like it's trying to say like, okay, so you've got, because it's showing cataclysm. It's showing cataclysm of the very recent past in their time, right? They're basically saying, here's the world we lost.
Right.
But they're also pointing to now, which is, by the way,
for some reason.
Yeah, which is, by the way, like antipodal. It's on the opposite side of the processional wheel from where they were. It's 12,000 years apart.
Right.
So that puts us in the night of their day or the day of their night or whatever however you want to look at it.
And then you take the Mayan calendar.
Right. The end of the long count just happened. Right. And it pinpoints this time as well. The 2012, the
one of the cycles of the Mayan calendar is the precessional cycle, 25,920 years.
Right.
And it just, quote unquote, restarted.
Right.
In 2012 based on, this is still theorized, but based on the sun, okay, the heliacal rising on the equinox, the sun rising and eclipsing the center of the galaxy, which is pretty much an 80-year window. So
Right, and there's something weird about the center of the galaxy too. That there's a dark area there that they called I can't remember there was something special about it.
dark rift.
Right, the rift. It was something like that. There was this spot that when the sun moved into it, that was like at least the Mayans appeared to have marked this as like, here is where this calendar starts,
Right.
and thus ends. Right. Like, so we mark, our calendar begins in January, right after the winter solstice. That's how we kind of like our yearly calendar, right?
Right.
We started over right after the winter. So we had the winter solstice, and then bam, we like December 25th, 21st, 22nd, 23rd, whatever. That's the solstice. We start the new calendar right after that. That's the new year. So what is the new year of the precessional wheel? Well, the Mayans seem to have pinpointed it at this sun appearing to rise into the center of the galaxy.
Right.
Which is like relative to precession, because most precession stuff is like, it's so long that you point to an age and you got 2,000 years, right? It's hard to point. The ages aren't really subdivided very well. You can't do that very well. But using this rising of the sun, that's a very much smaller period. It lasts for about 80 years, and we're right in the middle of it. Okay, so if they're pointing to this 80-year period of this happening, we already have gone through 40 of it, and nothing has happened yet. So we have like the next 40 years to wait for the bull to come down from heaven and really start. Yeah,
and that was the other thing we talked about too. The processional ages versus the stories of old and what gods they were worshiping.
Right.
So you have the time of Exodus. Moses goes up on the mountain to do the 10 Commandments deal and coming back down, and he's being directed by somebody who's saying, I'm the only one, you need to worship me now. Well, he gets back down there after who knows how long he was gone, and they've built a golden calf and they're worshiping it. Well, it was in the time
they're
of...
And he's like, what the
fuck? Well, it was in the time of Taurus.
Right.
Right?
They were just following the Egyptian traditions. Yeah.
Right. So you can see, well, they're, quote unquote, worshiping the
age.
But you could also say, well, they're not worshiping the age. They think it's still in the time of Taurus, and he's trying to say, no, we're moving on. We've moved on to the next age.
Right. And he convinced them because his face was shiny at this point.
Right. So then you fast forward, and you have Jesus is born, right? And there's the sign of the fish. And in the Christian tradition, the underground church, they say they used to use this sign of the fish. Like one guy takes his foot in the sand and he scratches a curve. And if you were a good Christian, also keeping secrets, you would go along to that little curve scratch and you would scratch another curve.
That's like the secret handshake. Yeah,
the little fish sign.
Right. Well, that's the Vesca Pisces, by the way.
The fish sign is the sign of Pisces. Yeah. And that is the age we were in.
Up until very recently.
When roughly about the time Jesus was born, 2,160 years ago, up until we just moved into the age of Aquarius,
right? Which is
the water bearer.
And the bringer of knowledge.
That's right. So knowledge being synonymous with...
I wonder if that's why the book is open. Because it's the age of Aquarius.
I don't know. But the water bearer. Dude,
yeah.
Right. The water bearer.
But it's not supposed to be water this time.
Right. It's fire water. He's also knowledge, which is fire.
Right. That's true. Yeah. Prometheus.
So he's both. So he can be one or the other. Anyway, this is what we do. We learn a bunch of stuff we don't understand, and then we think about other possible things that could possibly make it even more confusing.
Right. Like Nephas. Giants with too many teeth.
Yeah.
Buried in mounds all over the United States.
So
hidden for some reason.
Thanks for listening, everybody, and thanks for your questions.
Yeah, hopefully we added a bunch of questions to the questions you gave us. I'm not sure if we cleared anything up, but at least you have some kind of nominal storyline you can think of whenever we say Babel or
Nephas.
Nephas or Anunnaki.
Inkini and Lil and Anu and Inanna,
Shining
Ninhursag.
Ninhursag.
All right.
And you can go to the blog at brothersoftheserpent.blogspot.com, and you can leave comments there on the shows, comments or questions, anything like that. You can also email us, brothersoftheserpent@gmail.com. Thanks to Laura for the lovely intros. Thanks to Smith Sonic Studios. Thanks to Athrim and AWAX.
And Kamak for the email.
And yes, the Kamakian for the great email. And all of our other listeners, Ethan for the questions about the Anunnaki, Jackson for the questions about the Ice Age. And thank you guys very much. And we will see you in our next show next week.
That's it.
Good night, Adamu. Get to work. Get that plow. Plow that field.
Watch out for snakes in the sky.
And don't forget to make bananas. Lots of bananas.
Don't bring up the bananas.